Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Before we begin today's session of comprehensive news analysis, an important announcement, especially for those appearing for the 2022 IAS examination. BYJU'S is bringing to you the National Scholarship Test. It's an online test that will be held on 9th January 11 a.m., which gives you a chance to win up to 90% scholarship for BYJU'S IAS courses. The last date to register is 8th of Jan 6 p.m. The link to register is given in the description of the video. Please do register and get a chance to win up to 90% scholarship. Let's now begin with today's first article that talks about an increasing culture of giving out freebies to the voters by different political parties across the country. The author here is making a point that in the upcoming election season, where 5 states are going to the polls very soon, including UP, Uttarakhand, Manipur, Goa, and Punjab, we see one after the other political parties offering freebies to the voters. It includes the Aam Aadmi Party offering 1000 rupees per month to all adult women, then the Shiromani Akali Dal making the offer even better, offering 2000 rupees for every poor woman in Punjab. Not just this, the Samajwadi Party in UP is promising 300 units of free electricity to everyone if they come to power. This is not the first time that such political parties are offering freebies to the people when the elections are coming. However, the author says that this is a dangerous practice and we must go beyond this and look for real development. Because if these kind of freebie policies continue, there will never be enough emphasis on job creation. Because the political parties in power know that even if they don't work for 4 years, just a few months before the election, if they can dole out a few freebies for just a few rupees in everyone's account, they will surely come back to power. Thus, the entire mentality of the ruling class as well as the people who are going to the voting booth has to change in order for India to overcome this freebie culture. Many people justify this calling it welfare politics. There is a distinction between welfare and freebies. For instance, when the government is helping a section of population that needs government support, when, for example, the government gives subsidy on urea or when the government gives subsidy on the LPG cylinders, those are not freebies. Those are welfare policies because a certain section of population needs help from the government in that regard. However, when the government starts offering freebies before the elections by offering free things to each and everyone without any qualification criteria, that is when it becomes detrimental because now it does not give any incentive for the government to work to increase the jobs of the people. It does not provide any incentive for the government to work hard for 5 years and fulfill their promise. In the past, it has been seen that such promises have resulted in massive political victories for parties across the country, and that is forcing the other political parties also to take the same route. This is one of the problems with democracy. That is, the political party needs most number of votes to get to power. And everyone knows that getting the most number of votes will be possible only when you promise something to the people which they think is beyond them. This goes against the principles of market driven development. Market driven development means that governments, rather than offering free cash into their accounts, the government should offer them jobs so that they can earn for themselves. There's a great saying that the best thing that you can do for a hungry person is not to give him food, but to give him a job so that he can earn his own food every single time that he is hungry. That is what our political leaders need to understand right now. We must also understand that the political class and the people who are running the factories and the industries are not on the same line because for both of them, their interests are varied. For instance, for politicians, they would ideally want to create and protect jobs, build public amenities, etc. But for investors who are running their businesses, for them, job creation is not the priority. In fact, if I'm the owner of a factory, I would want as lesser people as possible working in my factory so that I can increase my profit. If I can manage the same productivity with lesser number of people, it would only increase my profit coming into my pocket. That is why the investors are not incentivized to increase their workforce. They would obviously want cheaper places, cheaper workers, etc. Politicians, on one hand, want minimum global tax so that every company must pay certain number of taxes. Capitalists, on the other hand, would try to escape all the taxes. That is why, in the growth story of the country, you can't expect the politicians and the industrialists to work hand in hand because both of them have different interests in their mind. We must also understand that we are moving in a direction where more and more jobs are being taken over by the machines. Thus, for more production, we don't really necessarily need more labor nowadays. The growth can increase even by producing much lesser jobs nowadays, and that is why jobless growth has become a norm. The same work now can be done by a single machine handled by a single man that used to take 20 people about 20 years back. And that is why across the world there is also a debate about providing universal basic income. Many billionaires, including Elon Musk, has said that over the years, when we see machines taking over the jobs of humans, you will see that universal basic income has become a necessity. The idea of universal basic income has been discussed in India as well. The idea is that irrespective of whatever you do, or even if you don't have any job, the government must provide you certain amount of money in your account every single month so that you can sustain yourself even when you are not earning. That can be 1000 rupees, 2000 rupees, 500 rupees, but it has to be universal without any condition attached to it. The idea of welfare schemes and giving subsidy in India is not very new. It used to be a norm in 1960s and 70s, but in the 1990s, when India's foreign exchange reserve hit an all-time low and we were undergoing an economic crisis, many governments rolled back their subsidies and thus they were moved out of power by the people. And thus the governments and the political parties have realized that if they want to remain in power, welfare policies and freebies are an essential weapon they need to use. That is why schemes such as Manrega have grown over 4 times between 2014 and now. The amount of money that is being spent in Manrega without building any concrete, long lasting infrastructure is huge. We have also started providing free of cost cooking gas, incentives to farmers, and not just this. Many state governments, for example, Delhi government, is now offering free pilgrimage to the people above a certain age who want to opt for it. Thus, these welfare policies or the freebies are followed by almost every political party and cover almost every religion. All that the political parties want is your vote against all these policies. Now, in the short term, it does not harm anyone. For example, if I tell you that I will give you 2000 rupees in your bank account, or if I tell you that from tomorrow onwards you don't have to pay your electricity bill or internet bill, you would all be so happy with it, right? But you have to realize that nothing is free. If you're getting something for free, then you are the product yourself. Where is the government getting the money from? The government ultimately does not earn anything on its own. All the expenses of the government are in the form of the taxes that you are paying. The reason why you're paying high taxes on petrol, the reason why you're paying high cost in LPG cylinders is because the government is using that money to give you freebies or subsidies in some other manner. There is no other source of money for the government except from your own pocket, which we have to understand. And even then, when these governments offer these schemes, they are projected as generosity. Like we don't deserve it, like the government is giving us something free of cost, which is not the reality. At the end of the day, it is our own money. Let me give you an example. When you book a railway ticket on IRCTC, you will see that the website says that we are only charging you 57% of your cost. Means if the railways is spending rupees 100 on your transportation, railways is only taking 57 rupees from you. Means railways is occurring a loss of 43% on every passenger railway ticket. But how is it that the railways are still running? They are getting funded by the government. Through what money? Through the money that we only pay from our taxes. So either you pay the railways directly or you pay your taxes to government which will indirectly pay for the railways. So it is all the same that the people of India need to understand while they are using their power to vote. The only way out of this is when you empower the people to earn for themselves, when you focus on creating jobs rather than giving them unemployment benefits. But sadly, this is not really the case in most parts of India. Now, the freebie politics culture in India is very old. Let me give you a bit of background. The one state in India that is well renowned for freebie politics is Tamil Nadu. Although now almost every state is seeing this kind of policies, but Tamil Nadu is the one that actually started this, with almost all political parties offering a lot of things to the people in exchange for their vote. The practice has now spread to northern states as well, such as Delhi, UP, Punjab, Chhattisgarh, so on and so forth. But the problem is that this model is not sustainable or viable. For instance, Delhi government recently decided that the women in Delhi will be given free rides on the DTC buses. This alone would cost rupees 300 crore to the government every single year. Now, this money is coming from the government budget only, means it could have been used for other important schemes as well. Now, the problem is that the Election Commission of India does not have a lot of power to curtail this freebie culture that has developed. There is no legality on that promise as well. For example, if the party says that I will give everyone a motorbike if I come to power, they don't really have to fulfill that promise. You can't go to the court against that. You see what happened with the 15 lakh promise. If the government said that 15 lakh would come into everyone's account, and when it did not come, you can't go to Supreme Court saying that I voted for the government because of that promise. So there is no legal backing for those promises. These promises made in the manifesto also don't come under corrupt practices under the Representation of People Act. That is why no legal action can be taken against it. The parties who are in the opposition can question the source of the funds from the government, but can't really stop the government from giving anything free to the people of the constituency. This question, in fact, has even been asked in the Supreme Court. In 2013, the freebie culture existing in the state of Tamil Nadu specifically was challenged in the Supreme Court in the Subramaniam Balaji case. The court said that it is the Election Commission of India that is responsible for giving certain guidelines in the Model Code of Conduct to check these practices. But the problem is that the Model Code of Conduct only comes into being when the election schedule is announced, which is about 1.5 to 2 months before the election. So even if a political party wants to announce something for free 6 months before the election, there is nothing that actually stops them from doing it, which is harming the country entirely. And the author says that we need to move beyond this and not expect freebies in any sphere of life. In this regard, there is also a very interesting quote that you can use if you want in your examination. The quote is from Bihar Chief Minister Shri Nitish Kumar. He said that there won't be any need of freebies if three institutions work properly: Daroga, the ticket examiner of the trains, and the bank officer. So essentially, these three are the points where you have to pay something extra from your pocket in order to get what you really deserve. And the chief minister said if these institutions work properly, the government would not need to give any freebies and the existing system would take care of all the problems. The next article that we have talks about the tobacco industry in India and how there is a false narrative being built by the tobacco industry. In short, the author says that whenever the government tries to increase taxes on tobacco products, the tobacco industry starts making a point that increasing taxes will result in illegal trade of tobacco and the government will not get any tax benefit from it. The industry says that if you increase the taxes to a large extent, the people will now start buying it illegally in the black market, and neither the industry nor the government will be able to benefit from it. The author here, who is a health economist and a professor in Kerala, says that this is a false narrative and the industry is doing it just to stop the government from increasing taxes on tobacco products. As per the article, tobacco alone kills 13 lakh Indians every year, and the economic burden of tobacco on India is more than 1% of the GDP, which is huge. Economic burden means, for example, you are a user of tobacco and you fall ill, you would have to be treated in a government hospital or using government schemes such as the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Thus, you are an economic burden on the government. For that time period, you will not be able to work, you will not be able to pay income tax, etc. That is also adding to the economic burden of the government because of your tobacco consumption. The article also says that about 27 crore people above the age of 15 years and 8.5% school-going children in India use tobacco in some form or the other. As you know, India right now is the second largest consumer of tobacco in the entire world after China. The author quickly jumps on to break the false narrative that has been built by the tobacco industry. The author says that around the world, various studies have shown that the only way to curb and bring down the consumption of tobacco is for the government to increase taxes. There is nothing else that has worked in any country across the world. In fact, the WHO also recommends high taxes to be imposed on tobacco products, and only then the large amount of population won't be able to afford it, and the health burden of the country would come down. But for some reason, this is not being followed in India. The author says that the tobacco industry has convinced the government that 25% of cigarette market in India is running illegally, means it is being black marketed with the government not getting any taxes from it. However, multiple other studies have suggested that this number is false. In fact, two credible studies showed that illicit cigarette market in India is only about 2.7 to 6.6%. Thus, there is a strong case for the government to increase taxes on tobacco products. On the contrary, there has been a 3% real decline in the GST revenue from the tobacco products in the past 2 years, and the profit of these companies has increased. ITC, which is by far the largest cigarette producer in India, gets 85% of its profits just from the cigarette business alone, despite having many other arms. The author also says that India's illegal market of cigarettes, if believed in these reports, is much lower than the world average. The world average of illegal cigarette markets is about 11.2%. Thus, the government must not think twice before increasing taxes on these sin products. India also has a moral responsibility of doing so, since India has already ratified WHO's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control that aims to stop illicit trade in tobacco products by improving the governance and making sound policy structure. Now, let's see the real numbers of India's taxation on tobacco to understand what the author actually wants. Currently, the tax burden on cigarettes in India is well below the global standard. Countries such as Australia and New Zealand are the ones that have imposed the highest tax on cigarettes and other tobacco products. In India, the total tax burden, means if you include the GST plus all different types of cess, then the total tax burden on cigarettes is about 52.7%. For BDs, only 22%, and 63.8% for other smokeless tobacco, means the tobacco that you chew. This is much lower than what has been recommended by the WHO. WHO recommends that on tobacco products, we must have at least 75% tax. In fact, in India, since July 2017, there has not been any major hike in the tobacco tax. Thus, the profit of the tobacco industry is only increasing. Another interesting thing to note here is that in India, 89% consumption of tobacco is through non-cigarette category. Means even if we increase taxes on cigarette, it will not really result in a lot of tax revenue for the government. Means we also have to focus on BDs, which the government has ignored for a long time. Now, there is one other question that you should have in your mind. What is stopping the government from increasing taxes on tobacco drastically? Now, let me give you two major points. First, tobacco products are also one of the major earning sources for the government, meaning that the government cannot afford to increase the taxes so much that people stop buying tobacco. Because if everyone stops buying tobacco, government won't be able to earn from it. Thus, the government must strike a balance between tax high enough so that the government earns more money, but not so high enough that everyone stops consuming tobacco. Because the government can't afford to have low tax revenue from tobacco stream. Second, there is a concept of lobbying. Now, lobbying is not a word that we see in India very often. It is a practice that is seen in countries such as the US very often. Let me give you an example. So, in the US, keeping a gun is a right. You can just walk into any general store, get a gun without any license. Because of which, there have been a lot of gun related shootings in the US. Now, whenever there is an unfortunate gun related incident in the US, political parties demand that we should ban guns, or at least we should make it difficult for the people to buy guns in the US. Now, if the government makes it difficult to buy guns in the US, who will be at a loss? Obviously, the gun manufacturing companies. So, gun manufacturing companies have made a body called the NRA. This is called the National Rifles Association. So, National Rifles Association, what they do is they contact all the members of parliament and they tell them that whenever the government is trying to introduce a bill to ban the selling of guns or to make the buying of guns difficult, please vote against the bill. In return, what we will do? We will not do anything illegal. But wherever your constituency is, we will build a free hospital for you. We will build a free school for you. We will build a free park for you so that you can go to the people and tell them, see, I did so much development, now vote for me in the next election. This is called lobbying. In other words, influencing the lawmakers either legally or illegally to vote in your favor. NRA has been so successful that they have not allowed any American government over the years to make it difficult to buy guns in the US. Even today, there are gun related shootings in the US, but still you can easily buy a gun. The same is somewhere the case in India. You can demand the government to increase taxes on such products, but the government will not do that overnight because they have a lot of considerations in their own mind as well. The next article is in the form of an interview and talks about whether or not the government's decision to increase the minimum age for women to marry in India to 21 is correct or not. It's an interview where answers have been given by two eminent authors. So, what I will do is I will try and give you a gist of what the content of this particular article is rather than going into the personal opinions of these people. So, as you know, the government recently proposed a law to raise the minimum age for women to marry in India from 18 years to 21 years. After the opposition parties raised objections, this bill was sent to a committee for further scrutiny and has not been passed till now. The government says that they are doing this to ensure equal chance for women in higher education, have more access to jobs, help in maternal mortality rate and nutrition level. Just to give you an idea, right now the minimum age for marrying for males is 21 years in India and 18 years for women. The government is trying to change this 18 years and bring it at par with males to 21 years itself. Now, the authors here say that the government's focus is not on the right thing. The proposed bill talks about the right age of marriage. It does not talk about the minimum age of marriage. The government is trying to suggest people when they should marry their daughters or sisters rather than saying that this is the minimum possible age. This is what one of the authors say. They say that the government's intention behind passing of this particular law does not seem to be correct since they are trying to interfere within the family matters, telling the parents or telling the adults in the family when exactly is the right time to marry their daughter or their sister. On the other hand, the article also supports this particular law by giving various examples. For instance, in urban cities especially, more girls are getting educated, more girls are opting for job, and thus they require certain protection by the law. They don't want their family members to force them into marriage just after their college finishes or just after their school finishes. That is why this law can protect the girls and give them extra years to make a name for themselves, to establish themselves in a professional career, and thus convince the family members to delay their marriage for some time. Even when the law was introduced to raise the age of women to 18 years, it was resented. So, resentment against this particular law is not new. Any new law will be resented by the people, and over time, the people will try and understand the merits of it. Now, one of the issues with the law is that many people say that this is especially targeting the minority women, including Muslims. Interestingly, the law itself does not specifically mention that it is for Muslim women. However, the people who are against this are saying that this is targeted towards Muslim women specifically. The authors here, one amongst whom is a Muslim woman itself, says that there has been a long history of encroachment of personal laws for Muslims. Means the governments over the years have tried to interfere in the personal laws for Muslims, and this is nothing new. In fact, it started with the British government, which introduced the Sharia Application Act in 1937, followed by the Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act in 1939. Even after the government, the Shah Bano case, triple talaq legislations are all examples of how governments continuously have tried to interfere with the personal laws of the Muslim community. This is done mainly because there is no codification of Muslim laws in India the way there are codified Hindu laws in the country. However, this new law, as per the author, should not be seen as encroachment. It is in fact progressive in nature. But the problem is with the implementation part. The author says even the minimum age of 18 that exists right now is not fully implemented in the Muslim community, since the Shariat law says that the ideal age to marry for a girl is when she hits puberty or at the age of 15 years. So, when the government is not able to stop the girls from being married before the age of 18, how will they be able to stop them getting married from before the age of 21? So the key question is about implementation of the law rather than what is the ideal age. There is also an interesting data point in this article. There is a misconception that it is the Muslim women who are usually married at a younger age as compared to Hindu women. But that is not really true. There is almost no difference between Hindus and Muslim girls when it comes to underage marriage, which was shown in the National Family Health Survey. The author also makes a point about the need for codified laws for Muslims as well. She is lamenting the fact that the Muslim women have different laws for them, which in itself is inequality. Polygamy, for instance, that is marrying more than once, is not allowed under the IPC for Hindus, Christians, or Parsis. Then why exactly would it be allowed for Muslims? The author says that if the Muslim community reforms itself, then the government will not need to step in. The reason why government is stepping in time and again and making intrusions on personal laws of Muslims is because the community itself is not taking that initiative. While it is hard to find any ill intentions of the government in this particular law, the problem is that the promises that the government is making, for instance, the health of women, the health of child will improve if the women marries later, is not scientifically proven. The article says that one of the major causes of maternal mortality rate in India is anemia, and anemia has no relation to the age at which the women is getting married. In fact, women who get married later on in their life tend to stay healthier because they are much more self sufficient, they are wealthier, and they can take care of themselves. So, age per se does not really have a connection with the maternal mortality rate. Yes, it is always better to allow the girl to be much more mentally and physically mature before getting married. Thus, the law is necessary, but just passing this law will not be sufficient to meet the health related target that the government is setting for itself. Rather than that, the government should focus on making education and health affordable so that even when the women don't have enough money with them, they can be self sustainable in terms of education and in terms of health as well. There is one more angle to this particular law. The authors say that the current Prohibition of Child Marriage Act is many times used by the parents of the girl, especially when the girl runs away from her house to have a love marriage. Even when the girl herself wants to get into a relationship, the parents don't allow it, citing that the girl is not an adult. Now, if we raise this minimum age to 21, it will make it even worse. Girls, for example, in the age of 19 or 20, are adults and are within their rights to choose the partner for their life. But this will allow the parents to annul the marriage and create more problems for the girl and her partner. In Nepal, recently, the age of marriage was raised to 20 for both men and women, and this resulted in a lot of young women in shelter homes just because their marriages were annulled and they had nowhere else to go. Their parents did not accept them, and now they are in shelter homes fighting for themselves. This situation should not arise in India, and the government should make efforts to ensure that the bill covers all these aspects when it is eventually passed. Now, let's also see why is it that the government introduced this bill and what is the history of the minimum age of marriage in India. This decision of the government to introduce the bill is based on the recommendation of a four-member task force led by Miss Jaya Jetli. This task force was set up to examine the age of marriage and its correlation with health, social indices such as infant mortality, maternal mortality, nutrition levels, etc. In India, The first law that came up to fix the minimum age for boys and girls was the Sarda Act in 1929 that fixed the minimum age for girls at 14 and minimum age for boys at 18. Later on, this law was named as Child Marriage Restraint Act of 1929. It was in 1978 that the law was amended and the minimum age was raised to 18 years for girls and 21 years of boys, which is the case even today. For Hindus specifically, the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 sets 18 years as the minimum age for the bride and 21 as the minimum age for groom. As we discussed earlier, as per Islam, the marriage of a minor who has attained puberty is considered as valid. Now, there are both pros and cons behind this government's decision. The pros are that it will lead to child and women welfare. As we discussed, in many cases, when the girl is married off at a very young age and is forced into having a physical relationship with her partner, that has a great negative impact on the health of the women and the child that is born from that marriage. So, raising the minimum age will allow the women and the child to be physically much more apt. It will also give more chances for women empowerment and gender parity. As I said, it will give more chances to women to pursue higher education, to pursue jobs, which would not have been the case if they were married earlier. It will also help the government in tackling the problem of child marriage, but that is more about how the government would be able to implement this law. There are some problems with the law also. First, as we discussed, child marriage is still a reality in India, as shown by the National Family Health Survey. And just by bringing a new law or increasing the minimum age for marriage, the government should not expect that the problem of child marriage will be solved automatically. Second, as we just discussed, if the minimum age is increased all of a sudden, it might lead to criminalization of a large number of marriages and thus there will be legal issues raised. This is what the government has to be wary against. The next article talks about the growing economic crisis in our island neighbor, that is Sri Lanka. All the studies suggest that the island nation is heading towards a sovereign default. In simple terms, the external stakeholders that may have bought the Sri Lankan sovereign bond, they will come back to our Sri Lanka for their money, and it is possible that Sri Lanka will not have enough foreign reserves to give back the money to the people who had bought the Sri Lankan bonds. That is why it is seen as a possibility that Sri Lanka will for the first time default on its sovereign bond because it don't have enough foreign reserves. Now, how did this problem start? And why is the situation in Sri Lanka so bad all of a sudden? As per the official record, Sri Lanka's foreign reserves right now are only $1.6 billion and they are draining extremely quickly. In fact, American credit rating agency Fitch recently downgraded Sri Lanka to a CC rating. The next rating after CC is the default rating only. So Sri Lanka right now is sitting in a very dangerous position. The lower the default rating, the higher rate of interest you would have to offer for your sovereign bonds if you have to raise money from the international market. On January 18th, Sri Lankan government has to pay $500 million for the sovereign bonds that are maturing. So from this $1.6 billion reserve, in the next 10 days or so, they would have to pay $500 million. So they will be left with something like $1.1 billion only, not considering any other imports that they have to make. Now, there can be many reasons for this problem, but the Sri Lankan government specifically is blaming the COVID pandemic for the current crisis. As per the government, the major sources of income for the government, that is exports, tourism, worker remittances, all of them have been hit. We have already discussed in the past how the government's policy of introducing organic farming in Sri Lanka all of a sudden has hit the food production in Sri Lanka, forcing them to import a lot more and reducing their export of tea, spices, and other agricultural products. Now, most of the external debt of Sri Lanka is in the form of market borrowings. Means they have sold their sovereign bonds at a certain rate of interest, and now the period of the bonds is getting over and the people will come to take their money back. Now, we just discussed that Sri Lanka has to pay $500 million by Jan 18. They again have to pay $1 billion by June. Means by June, they will be over with all the external forex reserves that they have. Means they will be left with no money to import food, fuel, medical supplies, etc. Already, a lot of essential commodities on the island nations are in short supply. People are not being able to find milk powder, etc. There's also a shortage of LPG cylinders because recently the government had decided to change the chemical composition of their LPG gas, which led to a lot of explosions, disrupting the supply chain for LPG as well. Now, whenever a nation is in such a trouble, like India was in 1991, the first and the very obvious option is to go to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and request them to give a loan so that their external debt and their imports can go on. But the government of Sri Lanka does not want to take that chance. Why? See, when you go to IMF and IMF gives you the money, with money they give a lot of conditions. Means IMF tells you how can you spend the money. You have to give a record of every dollar spent to the IMF. So you have to be extremely transparent. You cannot give freebies to the people, which every democratic government wants. The people in Sri Lanka are already very angry with the government. So government cannot stop their freebies, their subsidies now. IMF can also force the government to increase their taxes and their tax collection, which again the government does not really want because they have to win elections. So for most governments in a democracy, going to IMF is always a last option, which is also the case here in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government is trying to see if they can get money from some other way. They have also approached India. In fact, ever since the pandemic has started, the Sri Lankan government has been asking for financial assistance from India in multiple ways, including supplying raw material, food, currency swap agreement, etc. There were multiple news reports in December last year that the government of India is trying to put together an economic package to offer to Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan finance minister also will visit India next week in the Vibrant Gujarat Summit, and it is expected that India may offer something to Sri Lanka to stop Sri Lanka from moving towards China and taking help from them. Now, there are many other things that have also happened in Sri Lanka that has not been covered in this article. What is it? Sri Lanka is so desperate right now because of lack of money that they recently announced closing down 3 overseas diplomatic missions to save foreign currency reserves. Sri Lankan High Commissioner in Nigeria, consulates in Germany and Cyprus will be shut down from January. Not just this, Sri Lanka is offering incentive to Sri Lankan people living abroad to send remittances to Sri Lanka. So for every dollar that a Sri Lankan sends back to Sri Lanka, they will be given an incentive of rupees 10. So 10 Sri Lankan rupees additionally will be given per dollar to every Sri Lankan who is sending money from abroad. Earlier, this incentive was rupees 2 per dollar. Now, an additional 8 rupees will be given. Remember, this is Sri Lankan rupee and not Indian rupee. This scheme is called Incentive Scheme on Inward Workers Remittances. Also important to note that ever since this government has come in 2019, Sri Lanka's forex reserves have been on a decline. When Gotabaya Rajapaksa first became the president, the country's forex reserves were about $7.5 billion, which have now reached about $1.6 billion. Sri Lanka also had to close down its only oil refinery because now it does not have enough dollars to import crude oil. As I said, Sri Lanka has approached both India and China for help in the form of currency swap and credit line. They have also tried to come close to both the countries by giving them better deals. For example, the Colombo City Port, which is backed by China, will now have much easier rules and regulations for FDI. Similarly, India's Adani Group was given 51% stake to develop Colombo Port's West Container Terminal. All this is done hoping that the two countries will revert to Sri Lanka. Not just this, Sri Lankan government has agreed to transfer 40% government equity in a natural gas power plant to a US-backed firm, hoping that this would increase the forex reserves in the Sri Lankan government's account. But none of this has till now given the kind of results that the Sri Lankan government is hoping for. The next article that we have talks about the use of drones in India. Recently, the Civil Aviation Ministry has urged the Ministry of Home Affairs and other government departments to make appropriate use of drone technology and use it in different spheres, including defense, health and family welfare, agriculture, environment, power, road transport, etc. The Ministry of Civil Aviation has asked the Home Affairs Ministry to deploy drone technology for aerial vehicle surveillance, for crime control, VVIP security, disaster management, and much more. The government is hoping to make India a global hub for drones under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, and thus the government also recently announced liberalized drone rule 2021 to make it much easier to deploy drones in India in various sectors. Now, although this news article itself does not have a lot more information, but it does give us a chance to go back and look at what exactly are the drone rules of 2021. And in India, if you have to fly drones, what do you have to keep in mind? As we discussed, the government is trying hard to liberalize operation of drones in India and has cut down on a number of approvals and applications that you needed to submit earlier. The amount of fee that you earlier had to submit for a remote pilot license has also been reduced from rupees 3,000 to only rupees 100. Earlier, the fee to become a drone remote pilot was related to the size of the drones. But now, irrespective of the size of the drones, the fee will only be rupees 100 and the license will be valid for 10 years. Not just this, the government has also made 3 zones: green, yellow, and red. Green zones are those where you would not need any permission to fly a drone. The green zone means airspace up to a vertical distance of 400 feet or 120 meter, which has not been designated as a red or a yellow zone. Also, this should be at least 8 to 12 kilometers away from any operational airport. Not just this, for flying nano drones or micro drones, you don't even need a pilot license now, which was the requirement earlier. The government has also allowed foreign ownership in Indian drone companies, and drones up to the weight of 500 kg are allowed. This would also include drone taxis, specially used for transporting material from one place to the other. The government is also trying to generate unique identification number for all the drones so that they can be identified easily by the government in case there is a need. The maximum penalty for violations of these guidelines is up to rupees 1 lakh, and the government will also encourage setting up of drone corridors, especially for deliveries through drone. The government is also expecting participation from academia, startups, and other stakeholders to facilitate a growth-oriented regulatory regime in the drone sector. Hopefully, this will give a push to the drone sector in India and make it a leader as the government wants. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Though it started as an initiative to protect farmers against price fluctuations, the MSP has now become a point of contention, leading to several protests. List out the deficiencies in the MSP system and suggest possible remedies. Second, throw light on the problem of tobacco consumption in India and the possible ways for the government to curb its consumption. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.